It all began on the sunny shores of North Africa, where wind carried the scent of salt and cedarwood through a natural harbor shaped like a crescent moon. Long before Carthage became a rival of Rome or a name whispered with awe and fear, it was simply a settlement, modest in size, yet immense in potential. Around 814 BC, legend says Queen Dido, fleeing political chaos in Tyre, arrived with a band of Phoenician settlers. They bargained for a plot of land, just as much as a bull's hide could cover. But clever Dido sliced the hide into thin strips, laying claim to a much larger area. Thus began Carthage, Carthage, in Phoenician, the new city. From the very beginning, Carthage lived and breathed the sea. The Phoenicians were no strangers to sailing. Their reputation as traders stretched from the coasts of Egypt to the Tin Islands of Britain. Carthage inherited this legacy and supercharged it. With a strategic location hugging the Mediterranean's central coast, Carthage soon became the hub of a sprawling maritime network. Ships from Carthage didn't just carry cargo, they carried ambition, technology, and culture, leaving behind Punic inscriptions and purple dye wherever they dropped anchor. While many cities in the ancient world looked inward, guarding their walls and building monuments, Carthage looked outward. Its merchants dealt in gold, silver, ivory, olive oil, and wine. But more than wealth, what made Carthage unique was its structure. Unlike monarchies ruled by divine right, Carthage had a complex system of elected magistrates, councils, and a senate. It was, in a way, a republic, long before Rome would make the term famous. This political flexibility allowed Carthage to adapt quickly, take risks, and spread its influence like vines across a trellis. The city itself was a marvel. At its center stood the Bursa Hill, crowned with temples and high towers that caught the Mediterranean sun. Below sprawled residential quarters, bustling markets, and perhaps the most awe-inspiring harbor system in the ancient world, a double harbor, one for trade, one for war. From above, it looked like a giant eye staring into the sea. In its pupil sat the admiral's circular headquarters, connected to docks by a perfect ring of hidden ship sheds. At full capacity, it could house over 200 warships, each ready to launch at a moment's notice. And launch they did. As Carthage grew richer, its appetite for influence grew too. It established colonies in Sicily, Sardinia, and North Africa, creating a chain of outposts that gave it dominance over Western Mediterranean trade. Each new foothold extended Carthaginian reach and enriched its coffers, but it also drew the city into conflicts with older Mediterranean powers, especially the Greeks, who had colonized parts of southern Italy and Sicily. The tension between Carthage and these Greek city-states was more than economic. It was cultural, even philosophical. Greek city-states often emphasized individual valor and public debate, while Carthage prized efficiency, profit, and collective strength. Their naval encounters weren't just contests of strength, they were collisions of worldview. And still, Carthage prospered. But prosperity came with a shadow. Carthage's wealth relied heavily on slave labor, tribute from subject peoples, and mercenaries. Unlike Rome, which nurtured a large citizen soldier army, Carthage outsourced its wars. Its armies were a mix of Iberians, Numidians, Gauls, and Greeks, brave and deadly, yes, but not always loyal. That would prove fateful in the years to come. And then there was religion. Carthage's gods were not Roman or Greek. Chief among them was Baal-Hamon, the great sky god, often paired with Tanit, a protective mother goddess. Their rites were mysterious, intense, and to outsiders, terrifying. Roman and Greek historians whispered of child sacrifices in times of crisis, conducted in sacred enclosures known as tophets. While archaeologists still debate the truth, the rumors stuck, casting a long shadow over Carthage's reputation. Yet, despite these darker shades, Carthage thrived. For centuries, it balanced wealth and war, commerce and control. It negotiated treaties with Rome, traded with Egypt, and watched Greek power wane. By the 4th century BC, Carthage was the undisputed master of the western Mediterranean. But it was also watching something unsettling to the north. A new city was rising, bold, militarized, and hungry. Rome. At first, they coexisted. Then, they eyed the same island, Sicily. And everything changed. Carthage was no longer just a trading post, it had become a titan of the sea. By the 4th century BC, its ships crisscrossed the Mediterranean like clockwork, carrying purple dye, fine glassware, African ivory, and exotic animals to markets as far away as Iberia and the Levant. Its economy boomed, powered by tribute from subject cities and endless maritime trade. But commerce alone wasn't enough to hold an empire. Carthage needed dominance, and that meant securing key outposts through both diplomacy and force. Nowhere was this more evident than in the islands of the western Mediterranean. Sicily, Sardinia, and Corsica weren't just stepping stones, they were the chessboard. Carthage knew that whoever controlled these islands could control the flow of goods and grain throughout the region. And so, Carthage fought. Its first great rival in this theater wasn't Rome, it was Greece. Greek city-states had colonized parts of southern Italy and eastern Sicily for centuries. And they were as ambitious as they were proud. The resulting power struggle turned the island of Sicily into a battleground of wits and war. By the early 3rd century BC, Carthage had carved out a powerful foothold on the western side of Sicily. Fortresses rose along the coastlines, while Carthaginian generals clashed with Syracusan leaders like Dionysius and Agathocles. The wars were fierce and unrelenting, lasting generations. At one point, a desperate Agathocles even took the fight to North Africa, attacking Carthage's own backyard. The city weathered the storm, but not without scars. Still, Carthage held on. It had another weapon besides its army, its navy. Carthaginian ships were engineering marvels, featuring sleek designs, rows of oars, and devastating rams. Their sailors, trained from youth, maneuvered with precision honed over centuries of experience. The Carthaginian triremes and quinquiremes ruled the waves, often defeating Greek fleets that had once been considered untouchable. But Carthage wasn't just expanding westward. It was also digging roots deep into the Iberian Peninsula. Here, among the rocky coasts and silver-rich hills, Carthaginian influence spread through alliances with local tribes and the founding of new cities like Gator, modern-day Cadiz. Iberia would become more than a province, it would become a lifeline. Back home, Carthage flourished with its growing empire. The city swelled to over 400,000 inhabitants, one of the largest in the ancient world. Its streets echoed with the calls of merchants, the clang of artisans at work, and the scent of spices from distant lands. And towering above it all was the Bursa, with its temples, libraries, and elite council halls where decisions that shaped half the sea were made. However, this golden age rested on a precarious balance. Carthage relied heavily on mercenary forces, Numidians, Gauls, and Iberians who were fierce on the battlefield but often had no loyalty beyond their pay. If gold flowed, they fought. If gold dried up, they turned. It was a dangerous game, but one Carthage had mastered, for now. Meanwhile, a quiet storm was brewing across the sea. Rome had steadily conquered the Italian peninsula, subduing its neighbors and forging a confederation of allies that fed its growing military machine. Where Carthage thrived on trade and sea power, Rome built its strength on land, discipline, and citizen soldiers. The two powers were like mirror images, different in methods but alike in ambition. For years, they coexisted through treaties and cautious diplomacy. In fact, they'd signed multiple agreements delineating their spheres of influence, Rome in Italy, Carthage in Africa and beyond. But those lines blurred quickly when opportunity knocked. In 264 BC, a small conflict in Sicily sparked the flame. The Mamertines, a band of Italian mercenaries, had seized the city of Messana and were threatened by Syracuse. Desperate, they appealed for help, from both Rome and Carthage. Carthage answered first, sending ships to support them. But then Rome responded too, marching its legions into the island. Two powers now stood face to face on contested land. It was the spark that lit the First Punic War. Carthage, confident in its navy, believed it could control the conflict from the sea. Rome, inexperienced in naval warfare, began building a fleet from scratch, copying a captured Carthaginian ship plank for plank. They even invented a new boarding device called the corvus, a sort of gangplank with spikes that allowed Roman soldiers to storm enemy decks. It was clunky, but deadly. Rome was learning fast. As the 260s BC unfolded, Sicily became a meat grinder. Battles raged across its hills and coasts. Cities changed hands, then changed again. The seas turned into graveyards for both sides. Carthage's professional sailors often outmaneuvered Rome, but the Romans brought sheer numbers and stubborn will. Losses didn't deter them. They built more ships, trained more crews, and kept coming. For Carthage, the war dragged on like a stone around its neck. It had the resources, but not the same depth of manpower. Every defeat was costly. Every mercenary mutiny added strain. And worse, Rome wasn't just fighting, they were evolving. The war would rage for over 2 decades, with neither side willing to yield. But in the background, Carthage's greatest weapon was just coming of age, a boy named Hannibal, growing up in the shadow of war, watching his city bleed, vowing revenge. The First Punic War dragged into its 23rd exhausting year. By now, both Rome and Carthage had spent fortunes and lost tens of thousands of men. Sicily, sunlit and fertile, had become soaked with blood and rubble. But Rome, despite staggering losses, refused to break. The Roman spirit was like their engineering, rigid, methodical, and relentless. Even after catastrophic naval disasters, one storm alone destroyed over 100 ships, they rebuilt. Again. And again. Carthage, on the other hand, was stretched thin. While its navy remained powerful, its reliance on mercenary forces was starting to crack under the pressure. Soldiers from Gaul, Numidia, and Iberia fought bravely, but lacked the emotional investment Rome's citizen legions held. These men fought for gold, not for Carthage itself. And that difference began to matter more as the war ground on. By 241 BC, the final act approached. The decisive moment came not on land, but at sea. Near the Aegates Islands, Rome launched a surprise naval assault. Their fleet, now hardened from years of battle and equipped with experienced sailors, trapped the Carthaginian navy in an ambush. The result was devastating. Dozens of Punic ships were captured or destroyed. The cost was too high for Carthage to recover. At last, they sued for peace. The Treaty of Lutatius was brutal. Carthage had to evacuate Sicily, surrender all prisoners without ransom, pay an enormous indemnity, and accept Rome as the dominant power in the region. Sicily, once a shared frontier, was now a Roman province. Carthage's dream of Mediterranean supremacy took a staggering hit. But Rome wasn't done. Shortly after, it seized Sardinia and Corsica under flimsy pretenses, further humiliating Carthage. The city's treasury bled silver. The people were restless. And worse, unpaid mercenaries, who had fought long and hard in Sicily, revolted in North Africa. What followed was the terrifying mercenary war, also called the Truceless War, a bitter internal conflict marked by horrific violence. Carthage, fighting for its own survival, crushed the rebels only with great difficulty and shame. It was in the ashes of this crisis that a new plan emerged. If the western Mediterranean was lost, perhaps Carthage's salvation lay in the east. Iberia, rich in silver mines, strong warriors, and untapped power, became the new focus. And the man chosen to lead this rebirth was Hamilcar Barca. Hamilcar was a general of immense charisma and capability, a veteran of the First Punic War. He despised Rome, and he trained his children to feel the same. Among them was Hannibal, his son, who was just 9 when Hamilcar made him swear an oath, that he would never be a friend to Rome. It was no idle promise. It would shape the course of history. Hamilcar led a campaign across Iberia, both conquering and cultivating. Cities like Carthago Nova, New Carthage, were founded. Tribes were brought into alliances or subdued by force. And as the years passed, Iberia became Carthage's beating heart, supplying it with soldiers, wealth, and a renewed sense of destiny. When Hamilcar died in battle, command passed to his son-in-law Hasdrubal, and then, finally, to Hannibal himself. Hannibal was not just a soldier, he was a phenomenon. Brilliant, fearless, and innovative, he understood the terrain of men's minds as well as the battlefield. And he shared his father's hatred of Rome like a family heirloom. In 219 BC, he made his move. Ignoring a Roman demand to stay north of the Ebro River, Hannibal attacked Saguntum, a city allied with Rome. It was a direct challenge, and Rome took the bait. War was declared again. This time, Hannibal did the unthinkable. Instead of meeting Rome head-on through naval warfare or southern Italy, he decided to bring the war to the heart of the Republic itself, by land. He would cross the Alps, with his entire army, including cavalry and war elephants. It was an audacious plan, one that even many of his own officers thought suicidal. But Hannibal was undeterred. He marched his multi-ethnic army, Libyans, Numidians, Spaniards, and Celts, through the Pyrenees, across the Rhone River, and into the towering white wall of the Alps. The journey was hellish. Blizzards, rockslides, ambushes from mountain tribes, and starvation took their toll. Thousands died. Yet, against all odds, Hannibal emerged on the other side with about 20,000 infantry, 6,000 cavalry, and a handful of surviving elephants. The Roman Republic had never seen anything like it. A foreign army was now loose in northern Italy, led by a commander of legendary skill, and backed by a burning grudge. Hannibal wasted no time. He swept through northern Italy, defeating Roman armies one after another. At the Trebia River, he lured them into an icy ambush. At Lake Trasimene, he engineered a fog-covered massacre. And soon, the name Hannibal was no longer just feared, it was whispered like a curse in Roman streets. Still, the worst was yet to come. The Roman Senate was shaken. Their armies had been cut down, their pride wounded, and the countryside burned. Yet Rome, stubborn as ever, refused to surrender. They called up fresh legions, adjusted strategies, and prepared to meet Hannibal with everything they had. In 216 BC, they assembled the largest army Rome had ever fielded, nearly 90,000 men, and marched to face Hannibal near the town of Cannae in southern Italy. Hannibal, though outnumbered nearly 2-1, was unshaken. His strategy was clear and cold. At Cannae, on the dusty plains swept by dry winds, he laid a trap that military academies still teach to this day. He placed his weaker infantry in the center, flanked by his more experienced African veterans. His cavalry, superior in both numbers and skill, lurked at the wings. When the Roman tide surged forward, it smashed into the center, just as Hannibal hoped. His front lines bent but didn't break. As the Romans pushed deeper, thinking they were winning, the Carthaginian wings swept inward, encircling the Roman army in a deadly embrace. The maneuver was perfect. By day's end, tens of thousands of Romans lay dead, some say up to 60,000. Blood turned the dust into a red sludge. It was one of the worst defeats in Roman history. And yet, Hannibal didn't march on Rome. It's one of history's great what-ifs. With Rome's armies broken and morale at a nadir, many believed Hannibal should have advanced on the capital itself. But the city still had reserves, walls, and sheer desperation. Hannibal, ever the tactician, knew a siege could turn into a death trap for his forces, now far from their homeland and short on supplies. Instead, he tried to win the war through alliances, hoping Rome's Italian allies would turn against their wounded patron. Some did. Capua and other cities defected. But most remained loyal. Rome, through a mix of fear, loyalty, and shrewd diplomacy, kept its coalition intact. Even as Hannibal roamed freely in Italy for over a decade, Rome refused to yield. During those years, Hannibal carved a legacy of brilliance and brutality. He led lightning raids, destroyed more legions, and lived off the land. His elephants were long gone, his army thinned, but his legend only grew. Roman mothers whispered his name to scare children into obedience. Hannibal ad portas. Hannibal is at the gates. But Carthage, back home, grew distant. The Senate was cautious, unwilling to send reinforcements. Resources were limited, and politics splintered resolve. Hannibal, the greatest weapon Carthage had ever known, was slowly becoming isolated. He needed help, and it was not coming. Rome, meanwhile, adapted. Under Fabius Maximus, they embraced a war of attrition. Instead of direct battle, they shadowed Hannibal's forces, cutting off supplies, retaking cities, and waiting. The Fabian strategy, mocked at first, eventually paid off. Hannibal's men were worn thin. His promises to wavering Italian cities rang hollow with each passing season. Then came a new Roman star, Publius Cornelius Scipio. Young, charismatic, and daring, he understood that to defeat Hannibal, Rome had to change the playing field. Scipio proposed a bold move: invade Africa. Draw Hannibal out of Italy. Hit Carthage where it hurt. The Senate was hesitant, but Scipio, now a consul, had the authority. He sailed south, landing on African soil with fire in his eyes. The plan worked. Carthage panicked and called Hannibal home. After 15 years of campaign in Italy, he crossed the sea once more, into the same homeland he'd left as a young general seeking vengeance. Now he faced his greatest test. The two met on the plains of Zama in 202 BC. It was the final showdown, Scipio versus Hannibal. Youth versus experience. Rome versus Carthage. The armies were evenly matched, but the edge lay with Scipio. He had studied Hannibal's tactics, learned from Rome's previous defeats, and even negotiated Numidian cavalry support, formerly Hannibal's strongest wing. When battle began, Hannibal sent forward elephants, hoping to smash Roman lines. But Scipio had trained his men well. Trumpets blared. Gaps opened. The elephants panicked and ran, some into their own troops. What followed was brutal, hand-to-hand chaos. Spears clashed. Shields shattered. The Numidian cavalry struck at the right moment, collapsing the Carthaginian rear. Hannibal fought to the end, directing and adapting. But even he couldn't stop the inevitable. Carthage was defeated. The Treaty of Zama stripped Carthage of its empire. It lost its navy, its colonies, and its pride. It could no longer wage war without Rome's approval. An annual tribute was imposed. Hannibal, though spared, was a marked man. Eventually, he fled into exile, pursued for years before taking his own life with poison. Carthage still stood, but as a shadow. Its days of glory, elephants, and sweeping campaigns were over. Carthage was beaten but not broken. After the humiliating defeat at Zama in 202 BC, the once mighty city turned inward. It had lost its empire, its armies, and its freedom to act without Rome's permission. But within those confines, Carthage began to do what it did best: trade. The city's merchants returned to their old rhythms. Carthage's harbors, though no longer brimming with warships, were filled again with cargo vessels. Olive oil, grains, precious metals, and textiles flowed in and out of the docks. The city's artisans refined glasswork and dyes. Farmers improved irrigation. Its population grew once more. And wealth, steady, quiet wealth, returned. Rome noticed. Some Romans, especially in the Senate, grew uneasy. Carthage was no longer a military threat, but its commercial resurgence stirred memories of earlier days. Chief among these wary voices was Marcus Porcius Cato, Cato the Elder. He had fought in the Second Punic War and never forgave the city that had once brought Rome to its knees. Every time he ended a speech, regardless of topic, he tacked on the same grim phrase, Carthago delenda est. Carthage must be destroyed. At first, his warnings were ignored. Rome was now the unchallenged master of the Mediterranean. Macedon had fallen, Greece had been subdued, and new campaigns were being waged in the east. But Carthage's economic revival was inconvenient. It was growing too confident, too stable, too rich. And then, Carthage made a fatal mistake, not militarily, but diplomatically. To its west lay Numidia, ruled by King Massinissa, a longtime Roman ally and former cavalry commander at Zama. He had been rewarded with territory and allowed to expand his kingdom. Over the years, he began encroaching on Carthaginian land, raiding and seizing border settlements. Carthage, forbidden by treaty to wage war without Roman approval, sent complaints to the Senate. But Rome, favoring Massinissa, always sided with him. Eventually, Carthage had enough. In 151 BC, it retaliated, mobilizing troops and engaging Numidian forces without Roman consent. That was all Rome needed. The Senate erupted. The Hawks, led by Cato's echoing refrain, declared that Carthage had violated the treaty. It was time to act. The Third Punic War was approved. But this time, Rome wasn't interested in punishment or tribute. It wanted annihilation. In 149 BC, Roman legions landed near Carthage. The Carthaginians, shocked but not paralyzed, tried to negotiate. They offered hostages, weapons, even their own pride. Rome responded with impossible demands: complete disarmament, the surrender of all defenses, and finally, the evacuation of the city itself. Carthage was to be relocated inland, far from the sea. For a city born from the waves, it was a death sentence. So Carthage made its final stand. They fortified their walls, forged new weapons in secret, melted down sacred gold to build armor. Men, women, even children worked around the clock, preparing for the siege to come. The spirit of the old city, resilient, stubborn, defiant, rose again. The Romans, under Consul Scipio Aemilianus, grandson by adoption of Scipio Africanus, began the siege. Carthage held out, longer than anyone expected. For nearly 3 years, it withstood starvation, disease, and unrelenting assault. The harbor was blockaded, the land encircled. Yet Carthaginian resistance never wavered. It became a war of attrition, a death match between resolve and resources. Finally, in 146 BC, the end came. Roman forces breached the city's walls. What followed was one of the most brutal urban battles in ancient history. Street by street, house by house, Carthaginians fought with spears, stones, and bare hands. Fires spread. Smoke choked the skies. Civilians were cut down alongside soldiers. For 6 days, the city bled. On the 7th, it fell. The last defenders, including the commander Hasdrubal, surrendered in the temple of Eshmun. According to some accounts, his wife threw herself and their children into the flames rather than live in Roman chains. The city was looted, its treasures carted away, its buildings torn down or set ablaze. And in a final symbolic act, Roman soldiers reportedly plowed salt into the soil, to curse the land and prevent rebirth, though modern historians debate the truth of that detail. Carthage was erased. Not just defeated, obliterated. Its people were slaughtered or enslaved. Its name, once spoken with fear and awe, was buried under Roman arrogance and ash. The territory became the Roman province of Africa. And the city itself? It would remain in ruins for nearly a century before Julius Caesar, of all people, ordered it rebuilt. But that was another Carthage. A Roman one. The old Carthage, merchant queen of the Mediterranean, mother of Hannibal, mistress of the sea, was gone. In the silence after the fall, the Mediterranean seemed to breathe differently. Carthage, once the beating heart of Western trade and terror, was gone. Where tall towers once caught the morning sun, there was only rubble and ash. Roman banners fluttered over blackened stones. The screams had faded, but their echo lingered in the ruins, and in the minds of those who survived, if any did. But history never truly ends with destruction. It morphs, spreads, and leaves traces in unexpected places. The Roman world moved on quickly. With Carthage destroyed in 146 BC, Rome completed its transformation from regional republic to imperial juggernaut. That same year, it also conquered Corinth, delivering another death blow to Greek resistance. Two of the ancient Mediterranean's greatest powers fell in tandem, clearing the path for Rome to dominate without rival. In time, the Roman province of Africa grew prosperous. Roman settlers arrived, temples were rebuilt, not to Baal Hammon or Tanit, but to Jupiter and Mars. Roads were carved across the land. Grain poured from the African coast into Roman bellies. And as strange as it may seem, even the ruins of Carthage began to whisper opportunity. About a century later, Julius Caesar, ever the visionary, looked across the sea and saw potential. In 44 BCE, he laid plans to rebuild Carthage as a Roman colony. Though assassinated before the project began, Augustus carried it forward. A new Carthage rose, Roman in architecture and governance, but still perched on the same legendary harbor. By the 2nd century CE, Roman Carthage was one of the largest cities in Africa, thriving once again with trade, villas, and bathhouses. The ghosts of Punic grandeur, however, stayed buried under layers of Latin stone. But echoes of the old city refused to vanish entirely. In language, religion, and culture, traces of the Punic world lingered. The Punic tongue was spoken for centuries after the city's fall, and its religious traditions, altered, adapted, lived on. Even Christian theologians of later centuries, like Tertullian and Augustine, hailed from North Africa, walking the streets where Hannibal once dreamed of glory. Still, the old Carthage, the real Carthage, remained a cautionary tale to the Roman mind. It was remembered not just as an enemy, but as the enemy. The one who had brought Rome to the edge. The one who had dared to strike at the heart. Hannibal became a mythical figure, admired and feared even by those who had defeated him. His tactics were studied by generals for centuries. His audacity was legend. In Carthage's story, there is a peculiar paradox. It was a civilization defined by movement, of ships, people, and ideas, yet remembered most vividly for its end. It gave the world innovations in navigation, agriculture, and commerce. It built architectural wonders and navigated uncharted waters. It challenged empires and reshaped the Western Mediterranean. And yet, its name became synonymous with destruction. But perhaps Carthage's truest legacy lies not in its fall, but in its defiance. Few cities dared to stare down the expanding Roman Republic and say, no. Fewer still held out as long, struck as hard, or left as deep a scar. In many ways, Rome became Rome because of Carthage. The Punic Wars forged Roman identity, hardened it, disciplined it, and gave it its first taste of global ambition. In the end, Carthage taught Rome how to be an empire. And so, the story of Carthage closes where it began, in the shimmer of Mediterranean waves, under the cry of gulls, on a coastline that bore both greatness and grief. The harbors may be quiet now, the gods long silent, but if you listen closely, you can still imagine the sails, the scent of foreign spices, and the hum of a city that once dared to rival the world. If you enjoyed this journey through Carthage's rise and fall, don't forget to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share your thoughts in the comments below. Which part of Carthage's story surprised you most? Let's talk history together. Thanks for watching, and until next time, stay curious.